I'm going to talk about this century. Okay, 25 years. The first quarter of this century has elapsed. Khatam ho gaya. And oh boy, how bad it's been. It's been horrible. Right? And it's likely to get worse. Now, this century began with 2001, the way that I recall it. 2001, September 11th, I was a PhD student, Periyar Hostel mein, right? And someone came and told me, New York, there's been an attack. And he said, a kamikaze attack. And some of us didn't understand kamikaze hota kya hai, right? A kamikaze attack is a suicidal attack. Okay, it comes from the Japanese. The Japanese had these missions, kamikaze planes. They would ram these planes into the enemy targets. Now, I think this century began on a ruse. And the global order is also a ruse. R-U-S-E. Dhoka hai. Okay, as Mark Carney said, I mean, it was followed when it was convenient. It was violated when it was even more convenient. So, let me go back to why this century is turning out to be so bad. Because you are the people who inherit the century. हम लोग 20वीं सदी के लोग हैं. I mean, all mysteries of the 20th century. We're that old. And I think that there are many problems, unresolved issues of the 20th century, which have now entered the 21st century, which are waiting for some kind of a solution. Okay, now I'll try to outline what I think are those unresolved issues of the 20th century. People like me, I don't hold you responsible, but I hold myself responsible for some of the mess that we are seeing in the world right now. Now, it's for you people to be able to resolve some of these unresolved issues of the 20th century. But let me go back to 2001. Okay, 2001 began the global war on terror. Can you have a war on terror? Do you know the statistical possibility of dying in a terror attack? Anyone? Any idea? I'll tell you. You've heard of Sridevi? The actress Sridevi? Do you know how she died? She slipped in a bathtub and drowned. Now that's very rare. The statistical possibility of being killed in a terror attack is as minimal as that. Now can you compare that and contrast that to the level of resources that have been put into countering terror? There are politicians in the world, I won't name them, who every day get up in the morning and mention the word terrorism 5 times. Now this, I think, is the ruse on which this century has kind of played itself out. Aur hum log dhoke mein aa gaye. The media would keep barraging us with this idea that terrorism is the big problem. No, it wasn't. Yes, of course it's a problem. Who's denying that? But it is not the problem. If there is a problem that really faces the world right now, it is climate change. It's an existential threat. It's a big word, right? Existential. I use big words with a bit of caution. Now this, I think, is the problem with how people receive the world order. Because we have to wrap our heads around to understand what states tell us and how not to believe what the media tells us. And most importantly, you're all a social media generation, right? I'm sure that you spend most of your time online and you're on Instagram and the other things. I used to call Instagram kilogram by mistake, and my friends, "Arey, kilogram nahi Instagram hota hai." Anyway, and WhatsApp, I'm on WhatsApp, and that's the only social media that I can use. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on all the other various forms of, and I'm so glad that Mark Zuckerberg was taken to court, I think day before yesterday, by certain parents who are accusing platforms like, what are his platforms, Facebook and Meta, that they are so addictive, that they are ruining a whole generation. Now that's the problem with the world order. Okay, the problem with the world order is that you have a particular kind of platform capitalism that is really wreaking havoc with our everyday lives. Okay, I'm trying to look at the world order from the common man's perspective, let's put it like that. Okay, that's how I'm trying to look at the world order. I mean, my fellow panelists have also given you the big picture, but I'm just trying to think of how an ordinary person makes sense of the world order. Okay, so this is how I'm trying to understand the situation when it began in 2001. I think most of us were taken for a ride. You know what it did? It undermined something called civil liberties. You had legislation passed in various countries in the name of securitization, which has cut back on our civil liberties. हमारे और आपके freedom, I've been told, Delhi University में protest नहीं हो सकता अब. There you have it. That's a manifestation of the world order. Now this is the whole thing. The big idea of a global order is reflecting, manifesting itself in our everyday lives. There was a vibrancy in universities, my university, remember, okay? I remember it used to be a very vibrant, no longer the case. People like me are teaching there, so there's no wonder that it's not as vibrant as it used to be. But to come back to my point, Rityusha mentioned the 2007 financial crisis. Let me briefly talk about that. This is what happened before you were born, perhaps. But I think, if anything, we are perhaps in large agreement that we are witnessing the passing away of Western hegemony. I think there is broad agreement. Perhaps that's a good thing. I don't know, because we don't know what the new hegemon will look like. Knowing the Chinese, I'm not very optimistic about what China as the new hegemon how it will behave. I mean, not that the West has behaved very well, but let me come back to 6 years after 2001. Okay, so 2001 war on terror. Okay, I think it was a bit of a fraud, basically. Okay, has terrorism come down? Of course it hasn't come down. But countries went along with it. 2007, you had something called the financial crisis. It began from housing. Okay, people were given loans and they could not repay those loans, as a result of which the houses that they lived in were foreclosed. That's a big technical term, foreclosure. Okay, so it began from the housing sector. Now think about it. The whole point about a decent human existence is that we must have a solid roof over our head. That's what it's all about. Now we are living in a world order/disorder where homelessness is going up. It's not accidental. Okay, I've been living in the city for 3 decades now. That's a long time. Now the one thing I can tell you about the city is that every time I stop my car at the traffic light, the quality and the cost and the design and the brand of the cars has improved. The number of people begging on the streets has gone up at the traffic lights. So what do we have here? We have a particular kind of global order which cannot guarantee a basic decent existence for people. And when that happens, there will be discontent. So if the wars in the world are not stopping, it's not an accident. They're not stopping because the global disorder prevents those wars from coming to an end. So it's going to be, what is the date today? 20th February? I think on the 24th of February, it'll be 4 years since the start of Putin's, he doesn't call it a war, he calls it a special military operation in Ukraine. Think about it. Now when that happened 4 years ago, the conversations that I had with my friends was precisely on these lines. We are witnessing the death of an old order and the birth of a new order. Now the problem is that the old order refuses to die and the new order is being prevented from being born, and it is upon the responsibility lies with you to envision what this new order will look like. Okay? Now, I've mentioned 2 dates, well 3 years. Okay, 2001, 2007, and 2022. Okay? Let me go back a bit. I'm going to go back 6 years to 2016. No, I will not talk about demonetization, which happened that year, which I still can't understand why that was done. No explanation has been given for that. But anyway, let's leave that aside. 2016 for me represented the very clear passing away of the dominance of the Anglosphere. What did the Brits and the Americans do? The British did Brexit. Stupidest thing you can think of. To walk out of your closest trading partner, the European Union, just walk out of that. I mean, I said, I thought we were dumb to be ruled by these people for 200 years. But they're actually quite dumb. That makes us even more dumb. Now, in 2016, you had the Americans electing Trump. Okay? Now, I'm going to kind of point out a similarity here. Once again, what am I saying? I'm saying that for me, 2016 represented a clear passing away of the dominance of the Anglosphere. All right? They were very similar to each other, these two very significant global events. They happened in de-industrialized areas. Okay, the reason why people in Britain wanted to leave the European Union was because a large swathe of support came from what used to be the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. Remember, England was the first country to experience the Industrial Revolution. For the large part of the 19th century and a large part of the 20th century, Britain was the most powerful country in the world. And of course, they handed the baton on to the Americans. All right? Now, Trump coming to power is also the result of what in America is called the Rust Belt states. And what are the Rust Belt states? Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, there's one more whose name, because American states have very long names. Connecticut, I always get the pronunciation wrong, and so on. But why am I emphasizing this point? Why did deindustrialization happen in the US and the UK? Where did all the manufacturing go? Well, the point was made about China. There was a particular deliberate deindustrialization that was carried out by Western leaders in the US and the UK, as a result of which you had a certain kind of a discontent that manifested itself in the form of Brexit and in the form of Trump. Now, my point about Trump supporters is that their discontent was legitimate. Absolutely legitimate. Why? Because the ruling establishment, you know who the president before Trump was, right? You've heard of the man, Barack Obama. Heard of him? What else do you know about him? He speaks very well. I mean, the only good thing about Obama was that he speaks remarkably good English. Trump can't even string together two coherent sentences in English. I mean, English is supposed to be his first language, right? I remember when Obama came to power, and his speeches were brilliant. I was taken in by those speeches. I was younger in those days. So I was naive, permit me, and when we're young, we tend to be a little impressionable. I thought, oh, this is remarkable, a black man in the White House. Now we have an orange man in the White House. In between, you had a very old man in the White House, Joe Biden. But let me come back. The thing about Obama was, you know what? He could have reined in the financiers who caused the financial crisis. Remember the financial crisis that I was talking about? He could have done that. He didn't do that. And that's why you had Trump. Okay, Trump is no accident. He's happening, and I think it's a travesty that someone like Trump should be the president. You know, the problem with the world right now is, I'm going to quote Shakespeare, King Lear. "'Tis the time's plague that madmen lead the blind." That's the problem with the world. Let me say this once again. King Lear, Shakespeare. Okay, "'Tis the time's plague that madmen lead the blind." That's the problem with, perhaps Plato and Aristotle were right about democracy. This is what, I'm a great supporter of democracy, but I feel that if democracy is leading to these particular results, we have to, especially I'm a political scientist. I'm not an IR person. I'm a political scientist who takes a lot of interest in global politics. But I think certainly democracy will have to be re-envisioned in the 21st century, a century that you people will inhabit. Okay? It's going to be up to you to decide what kind of democracy. Certainly not liberal democracy, the one that Francis Fukuyama famously celebrated in a very foolhardy sort of way by saying, oh, this is the end of history. Liberal democracy is the most perfect form of government that we'll ever have. Well, look at what's happened to liberal democracy. But let me come back to my point. My point, once again, is that this particular global disorder is created by the very same people who upheld the virtues of a global order. And Obama, I have a lot of sympathy for Obama for the simple reason, he's a decent man. Okay, he seems to have a certain decency that you do not find in most politicians. But the problem with Obama was that he just spoke well and didn't do anything after that. It's often said that actions speak louder than words. In the Obama's case, only his words spoke and his actions. So you know who was his Treasury Secretary? I think his Treasury Secretary was, if I'm not, either Timothy Geithner or Larry Summers was in the administration, and guess where Larry Summers' name figured? In the Epstein files. There you have it. This is the kind of elite that was running the affairs of the world, and we know how despicable the global elite that runs the world is. Alright? So, what is the point that I'm making? Let me just make one more point about Obama. I love this point because I was trying to make sense of Obama, and then I came across an article in the New Left Review. Heard of the New Left Review? Very famous journal. It's a very good journal. I highly recommend that you read it, although the articles are a little long and can be a little on the boring side. But a man called Tariq Ali, no relation of mine, wrote an article on Obama calling him the president of Kant. Okay, his famous speech was, yes, we can. And Kant means a particular high-flown rhetorical way of speaking, which means nothing. So that was how it all came about. So once again, what is the point I'm making? The term disorder, order are actually conjoined. This particular disorder came out of the proponents of the earlier order. They were the people who have created this particular mess that we are in right now. Am I running out of time? Okay, that's my biggest fear. Okay, so where are we right now? We are in a big mess. We are in one huge mess. Now I'm going to focus on the last 4 years. Okay, 2022, the beginning of the Ukraine crisis, shows no sign of ending. Okay, Biden administration had come back to power. All right? Now again, I was wrong. These days I admit kahan galat ho gaya main. I was wrong to believe that the defeat of Trump meant a revival of democracy in America. I was perhaps naive. You know why I was naive? I'll tell you why I was naive. For the first time in my life, I watched every single moment of the Biden inauguration. You know, when American presidents are sworn in, they have an inauguration towards the end of January. Okay? Now, in that inauguration, all inaugurations have someone who comes and recites a poem. Okay, that's how inaugurations happen, presidential inaugurations. When John F. Kennedy, I'm sure you've heard of John F. Kennedy, the most handsome, charismatic American president ever, the Camelot period as it's referred, when he came to power, in his inauguration, 1960, the famous poet Robert Lee Frost recited his poem. Okay? It was Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, if I'm not wrong, that was the poem. Now, in Biden's case, there was a young 22-year-old Harvard graduate, a black woman, who came and recited her poem. Okay? And I was watching it, and I was taken, and I was wrong. I was too overly impressed by this. Okay, basically, it's America, right? You've got to be impressed by America. Right. Now, what was the poem? I'm going to recite one line from the poem that I remember. It went like this. It was called The Hill We Climb. Okay? The name of the woman, the poet, 22-year-old young woman, was Amanda Gorman. I still remember watching the television that day. Amanda Gorman was wearing a bright yellow coat, like the kind of yellow that you're wearing, the person sitting in front, that kind of a yellow. And there was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant winter Washington sky in the background. All right? And this is how the poem went. It went, the norms and notions of what just is not justice. Let me say that once again. It's important for order and disorder. The norms and notions of what just is not justice. We have a situation in the global disorder, this is the way it is. Okay? President Trump can do whatever he wants to. Venezuela, abduct Nicolas Maduro. Right? Given 10 to 15 days to Iran to conclude a deal. And you never know, they might attack Iran all over again, in the 12-day war that happened in June last year. Now my point once again is that as political scientists, we are never ever satisfied with the way things just are. There is a very significant ought in normative political theory. This is not right. Things cannot go on like this. Now what has the world tolerated in these last 4 years? And I say this with a lot of sadness in my heart. The world has tolerated a genocide that has unfolded, and we have watched it unfolding on our screens. And what have we done, especially in India? We have not spoken out. When history is recorded, this silence will be a loaded silence. It will not forgive us. Again, the Israeli government has passed a law where land will now be grabbed in the West Bank. Again, India has remained silent. I thought we were the land of Gandhi, where you spoke up against evil. Obviously, we're not doing that. Now, to come back to Gorman, let me say one more point about that point. I'm going to say this, recite those lines once again. The norms and notions of what just is, that's disorder, must move towards justice, which would be order. That's the distinction between disorder and order. And as human beings, we must live in an orderly rather than a disorderly situation. So I'm one of those political scientists who does not believe in realism and all those arguments that are put forward, no, power and national interest. No. As human beings, there is a certain decency, and we must make the transition from what just is to justice. Now let me say once again, when I heard this poem by Amanda Gorman, my first point was, wow, that sounds like Rawls in poetry. You've heard of American political philosopher John Rawls? Okay, theory of justice. Now the problem with philosophy is it's always written in a very boring sort of way. Okay, that's the problem with philosophy. You have big bearded men, very bushy beards. Usually it's men, right? And they write in the most arcane sorts of ways that puts you to sleep. Okay, so reading theory of justice is no fun. Reading Plato is no fun. Reading Aristotle, for that matter, is no fun. But the whole point is that when philosophy is translated into poetry, when it is translated into people's imagination, then you will have the possibility of transitioning towards some kind of order. And therefore, what I'm suggesting is that the responsibility lies with young people. Okay, do not think that you are without power. Don't think that that the only thing you can do is scroll on your screen. No, of course not. Because when it comes to envisioning what the new order will look like, it depends on decisions that we take. It's not going to fall from heaven, but decisions that are taken by all of us. Okay? Now, last point. Towards the end of September 2025, the UN holds a special session where people, world leaders from all over the world go and speak. Trump's speech was as bad as ever, so I won't spend too much time on Trump's speech. But I do remember the speech of the Prime Minister of Barbados, a woman called Mia Mottley. It was a brilliant speech, because you know what she said? She said that the rules of the old world order are being torn up by the very people who created it. It was the Americans, and Amitabh pointed this out, right? After the Second World War, what was put in place? You had Bretton Woods, you had the UN system, okay? From 45, we were discussing this before we came to this room, from 45 to 73, you had the golden years of capitalism. What does that mean? You had growth rates which went up, and most importantly, you had real wages of the working class going up. Now that is significant. Now when it comes to a world order must always be envisioned from the perspective of the person who is, in Rawls's term, the least advantaged. Okay, so I don't accept this argument about big power. It's about how states can look after their people. And therefore, if as young people, and young people are supposed to be idealistic, I don't know if that is the case anymore, but if young people are really to envision a new global order, it must begin in seminar rooms and conference rooms of this particular kind. Okay, when we take this argument that's all about big powers deciding, what people do is that they deny the very basis of democracy itself. And what is democracy? The people, right? So therefore, the world order must be envisioned from the perspective of the people, not the populist people, not the way that the populist invokes the people. Okay, populism invokes the people in a very instrumental sort of a way. I'm talking about a world order that ordinary people will inhabit. And what does that mean? That means people must be able to breathe clean air. We can't do that in this city. I mean, I just checked. It's still 180 AQI. Not good enough. But why does this happen? It happens because we allow world orders to be dictated and defined by global powers, and political scientists are responsible for this. Okay, so let me go back to Mia Mottley's speech. Late September 2025, she spoke very well, she speaks eloquently. And the point that she made was that as we move to a new order, we must be able to retrieve whatever is useful in the old order and carry that forward. Why is that important? It is important because in the old order, you had institutions like the UN. Of course it's dysfunctional, but it's not a bad idea. But let me make the case for the most important institution that I have in mind. It's called the International Court of Justice. Remember, what was my point? The gap. Okay, when I get off the metro, it says mind the gap. Seen it? What is the mind the gap between disorder and order? Okay, the mind the gap is the norms of justice that we create. And let me talk about the International Court of Justice. Why am I suggesting it's important? If the International Court of Justice is not reinforced, strengthened, you will have states doing all kinds of things and getting away with it, which is wrong. This should not happen. This would be disorderly. It would be an injustice. So when we envision a new world order, my submission, that euphemism that we use, my humble submission this morning is, as young people, there are aspects of the old world order that perhaps may need to be retrieved and carried forward, and most importantly, meaningfully extended. Among them is democracy. We are seeing the complete collapse of democracy. Democracy will have to be re-envisioned, not in a liberal democratic way, but in a much, much more reinforced, re-strengthened way. So the elements of what will the elements of a new world order, what could they be? Firstly, democracy, international justice, human rights. These are the things that will become very important in moving forward into a new world order. And I hope, as a middle-aged person now moving towards old age now, I hope I can see this before I leave. And I'm sure that you will inhabit this kind of a world. Thank you very much.